Hello there, people of the internet. So I was talking to a girl the other day, right? And that automatically puts me on a pedestal compared to some of you people. But I was talking to a girl the other day, and she had asked what I was doing for a living. And I said, well, I got a bunch of things that I'm doing for a living, but primarily I shoot things and blow things up for a living, and it's a really, really good time. And she was like looking at me a little bit puzzled. She was expecting me to say some conventional job or something. She was like, why the hell would anybody want to do that? And I got caught a little off guard. Like, I had to pause for a second. Thank you, Kevin. I know, it doesn't make any sense, right? I had to pause for a second here, right? And I was like, you know, I think the main reason why I do what I do is because I love what I do. And I'm over here making a YouTube channel based off of some of the things I do because I do them anyway. And I would literally be doing exactly what I'm doing right here, but just in regular life, because that's what I do. So today we're going to be talking about some of the things that I take into consideration whenever I'm thinking about what I would be using for any sort of concealed carry firearm. Now, there's a lot of considerations, and I'm going to say that your considerations might be a little bit different than mine. This right here is obviously a completely opinionated video, because there's just so many different opinions out there based on what would be essential, what would not be essential, what you'd want, what you wouldn't want, etc., etc. I'm not going to go into specific firearms. I'm mostly going to talk about specific genres of firearm, and I'll let you guys in the comments down below talk about what specific firearm it is that you actually want to go to. So I'm going to start off with the considerations saying some gun is better than no gun. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. Kevin's my peacock. I got 4 of them. They're all named Kevin. They're very noisy birds. You might actually see one of them come walking around here in a second. Some gun is better than no gun, and this right here is a very perfect example of that. This right here is an FIE Titan, chambered in 25 ACP. This was my CCW for a little while, just because this right here was all I had. Back before I was a gun guy, before I really discovered my passion for firearms, well, actually, I always had a passion for firearms. But back whenever I was so broken and disheartened and depressed and whatnot that I didn't really pursue that passion, this right here was my concealed carry, just because it was literally, very literally, the only thing that I had. I had this, I had a Chiappa 22 long rifle 1911 that did not work, and I had a 410 shotgun. Those were my firearms. So this right here was my CCW for a little while. Now, this is prone to malfunctions, and she, like, doesn't always cycle, and the magazine doesn't always feed, and this, I mean, anyone who's ever run one of these cheap Saturday night special 25 ACPs knows the problems that come with these things. The trigger on it is not great. At least it's accurate. I mean, I made a shot out at, what was it, like 25, 30? I can't remember the actual distance that I was at. But I made a shot out center target with this thing a while back. I'll splice in some footage on that if I can find it. And this thing at least seems to be pretty accurate, at least with that one single round that I put down on target. 25 ACP is not the easiest round to find, and whenever you do find it, it's not the cheapest round, especially for the amount of money that you're paying for the amount of round that it is that you're getting. But if this right here is all you have, like was the case with me, this right here is definitely better than having no gun. So first consideration right off the bat, some gun is better than no gun. If you can only afford, like, the most bare, basic, bottom-of-the-barrel handgun from, you know, some sketchy used dealership, I don't care what it is, you know, pawn shop Saturday night special for $100 or for $50. I picked this up for $8. It wasn't working. Then I got it semi-working, and this was my CCW for a while. You know, having something is always better than nothing, and that is the first point that I'm going to make out. Alright, next up on the list of some gun is better than no gun. If you perhaps have gotten into some trouble earlier in your life and you're in a situation where you can't purchase a modern firearm to defend yourself, or maybe you're in a country where you're not allowed to own modern firearms, or maybe there's some situation going on where you can't have a modern firearm, this right here is a very, very good go-to that a lot of people in those situations go to. I believe this is an 1861 pattern black powder revolver. This one is 44 caliber, and it says Army San Polo Brescia. Somebody's gonna get down in the comments and be like, wow, you are the whitest person I've ever met. Yeah, you're not wrong. My ability to pronunciate in foreign languages is not exactly the best, which is ironic because most of my rifles are from other countries. But long story short, this is a 44 caliber black powder revolver. That's like the general basis of what it is that you actually need to know. I believe it's 1861 pattern, but these right here are slow to reload, and they're not the most effective, you know, in terms of power and capability. Black powder is just not that great of a propellant. It's more like an explosive that launches a projectile. A lot of these are known to be not very accurate. Luckily, this one right here is not that bad in terms of accuracy, but these can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, and like I said, they're incredibly slow to reload. A lot of people actually have multiple cylinders of these, and they'll just pop new cylinders in, kind of like how people were to do a magazine change. Or you could get yourself one of these and then get yourself a cartridge conversion kit. But at that point, like, you're spending a bunch of money, and you're better off just getting yourself... What was that? You're better off getting yourself more of a modern firearm, unless it's something that you can't actually afford. But if you're in a legal situation, you can't have the modern cartridges either. So keep that in mind, depending on what your situation is and what it is that you decide to do. But this right here would make an alright gun, and it keeps in our theme of having some gun is better than having no gun. If you are able to have a more modern firearm, then I absolutely recommend that. But in my particular case, whenever I pick this thing up, I actually picked this thing up for like $60 or something like that, as a gunsmith special from the gun store that I had in town, just because the guy had it and he didn't feel like cleaning it. So I brought it home, I like scrubbed it down some, and I used my air blower to blow it out. And besides that, we're missing a screw on this grip panel right here, but the grip panel is still very much staying there. It's a functional firearm. I fired this on numerous occasions, and it seems to hit basically exactly where I'm aiming, depending on the ammunition that I'm using. I mean, for defensive ranges, this right here would absolutely be effective enough. And 44 caliber projectile, I normally rock about 35 grains of black powder inside of this thing whenever I fire this thing, and that is definitely not exactly like a potent round. It's not a 44 Magnum or anything like that, but it's definitely a pretty powerful round, and it will get the job done. I'd rather shoot something like this than a 25 ACP. Now, that being said, I'd rather have the semi-automatic 25 ACP with multiple magazines than something like this, but you guys at least see what I'm saying. This has the power. 25 ACP has the ability to put rounds down range really quickly. I'd rather have this than absolutely nothing, though. All right, now as far as having some gun being better than having no gun, this right here is like, I'd say, the top tier of that area. This is a Saturday night special, a Lon L9. This is an incredibly cheap firearm. Whenever you can find it, you know, any place that's not Gunbroker. On Gunbroker, they're going for like prices that you could normally get a brand new high point at, or like, you know, you shell out just a little bit more, and oftentimes not even the case of a little bit more, and you can get yourself a Taurus or something like that. But we'll get into that here in a little while. Whenever I bought this gun, actually, yeah, it was off of the internet. And I had paid $85 for this gun, you know, shipped to my door, ready to go. You know, here you go, 13-round semi-automatic. Of course, this thing right here was not in the greatest of conditions, and it needed some work from me. The safety on it malfunctioned. The grip safety on it malfunctioned. There was a lot of things not going very good with this firearm, so I definitely needed to do some work to it. And basically all I did was I bypassed the grip safety that's on the back of this thing, and I bypassed the actual manual safety. I'm not planning on using this for any real practical purposes whatsoever. This is mostly just a range toy. At this point, this gun is heavy and uncomfortable to fire. It is a straight blowback system. That's one of the things that makes this gun so simple and cheap and easy to produce and sell. But unfortunately, that does attribute to the slide being heavier, because for that straight blowback recoil, you need more mass in the slide to hold that chamber closed longer than, or long enough to go ahead and drop those pressures in the chamber down. Looks like my pin there is walking a little bit. I'll have to keep an eye on that. But for $85 for a 13-round semi-automatic 9mm, this right here is not the worst options. And as far as I've seen, like, for $100 you could get yourself this and like a box of rounds, and you'd be able to have yourself a pretty decent little setup. Now, like I said, this right here was just like kind of a deal that I found, and I had to do a little bit of work to make it go. But if you're not against doing a little bit of work to your handgun and you get yourself something, use that's perhaps not quite that functional, and then you make it functional, then this right here is definitely a good way to go. But that is going to lean from the first topic of having some gun is better than no gun to my second topic, reliability. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that, buddy. Reliability is very important whenever you're talking about a firearm for protecting your life. I'd rather have a firearm that goes bang sometimes than no firearm at all, but I'd much rather have a firearm that goes bang all of the time. This Lon L9 does not go bang all of the time. One of the biggest downsides I have with this thing is the trigger in this thing just is not great, and it doesn't quite pull that sear all the way down in order to drop the firing pin. And, like, it doesn't do that all the time. There's just sometimes where the recoil knocks that sear just a little bit too high up for the trigger to be able to pull it all the way down, and normally just like a little smack to it, you know, pop that sear back down into place where it's supposed to be, and then you can go ahead and run this thing just fine. I did do some upgrades to this thing, and I don't have that problem anymore, but with the factory stuff that came with this, the factory internals that came with this, that's one of the issues that I was having with this firearm, and that's one of the reasons why I'd gotten it so cheap, because the trigger was having problems. But now it's actually pretty reliable, and I've stuck, oh, I don't know, 200 rounds through this thing, maybe, rough approximation. I don't really like sticking a whole lot of rounds through these very cheaply made handguns because they do wear out fairly quickly, and this right here is one that I use for my videos. So take reliability into consideration. If this is all you can afford and you can make it reliable like I did, then hey, by all means, you go ahead and you go for it. For like $100, you can get yourself something like this, just like I did. I proved it's possible. You get yourself this and some ammunition, 13 round magazine, semi-automatic, 9mm. This is actually a pretty decent little accurate handgun too, now that I've tuned it up a little bit. Uncomfortable to fire, recoil's a little harsh. It's obviously heavy because of that massive slide right there. The bore axis is not that great, but it's actually better than some other handguns that I have. And it's easier to fire than some other handguns that I have. The trigger on it, not fantastic. It kind of feels like you're, oh, how would I describe it? Let's say you have an army man, like one of those little plastic army men, and you squish him, and like, as you're squishing him, he's easy to squish, but it gets harder and harder as you squish it. That is literally what this feels like. It feels like squishing Army Man plastic, and there's no break or anything like that. You just continue to pull it back, pull the trigger back until the gun actually fires. Now, hold on. There's no lock opening on this thing. The reset on this thing, wow, that is like all the way forward. So the trigger on this is definitely not that great, but it's better than no gun, and since my upgrades, it's more reliable. So definitely a good option for the price that you pay, but I would recommend going with something that would be even more reliable than this, because it still occasionally has some malfunctions. Now we're going to start getting into the actual like considerations for what I think about whenever I am looking for concealed carry handguns. Of course, what we had talked about before was definitely important, but those were like kind of a given. I'd say like the biggest things with concealed carry handguns is weight and size. This is a full-size 1911 A1 copy. This is a Turkish copy. 1911 A1 U.S. Army, made by T-Sauce from Turkey. I'm sure I mispronounced that. Somebody in the comments is going to yell at me for it. It always happens. 245 ACP single stack. This is not the best option for concealed carry unless you're like a really big dude in the Arctic and you're rocking like a giant coat or something like that. I mean, it is absolutely possible to conceal carry in 1911. People do it all the time. But I'm saying it's not the best option. This right here is a steel frame, incredibly heavy gun with incredibly heavy ammunition. Unless your belt is super tight, then it's going to be dragging your pants down. Ask me how I know that. This is just not that good of an option for concealed carry because of how large it is and how heavy it is. You're going to notice that you have a gun on your hip. This would be considered a big iron on your hip. You would very much pay attention to how it is on your hip. Now, what am I trying to say here? There's alternatives to this design that are a much better concealed carry option if you are just absolutely wanting something like this. I would not recommend getting a smaller, more compact version of the 1911 in 45 ACP, because whenever you start to really compress the design of the 1911, you start to really get into reliability issues. And you don't want to have reliability issues in a gun that you are using to protect your life with. So if you make the gun smaller, keep it in 45 ACP, you're going to have reliability issues. It just happens all the time. And with this design, they're more prone to malfunctions with hollow point ammunition, unless you're getting yourself something specifically designed for hollow point ammunition. But if you're rocking the original 1911 design, they're made for ball ammunition, and that's just the way the feeding system is. That's the way it was designed for. It's a military handgun designed for ball ammunition, which is what the military was using at that time. So keep that in mind if you decide to rock one of these. That goes into the reliability section of what it is that we're discussing here. But the 1911, for its size and its weights, and we'll talk about capacity here in a second, but definitely not a good option. But there are alternatives if you are looking for this style of handgun. Let me go grab that. All right, if you are prone to wanting some kind of 1911-esque design, this right here is my Star Model BM. These guns are not very expensive. You can find them for like $250 to $300 depending on condition and where it is that you actually get them from. This is, for all intents and purposes, almost a clone of the 1911. Obviously, it's got a lot of inspiration from the 1911. The extractor is external, makes it a lot easier to swap out. The trigger is just a little bit different than a 1911. It pivots instead of pulling back. But for the most part, this right here, for, like I said, all intents and purposes, is basically a copy of the 1911, right down to the single stack magazine. This is chambered in 9mm, and a 9mm and a more compact style, a more compact 1911 style just tends to be more reliable. So I would recommend going with some sort of 9mm variant of a compact 1911 if you want to stick with the 1911 design. Or you could go shilling out a lot of money for a good 1911 compact that you know is going to be reliable, but those are significant amounts of money. So I'm not saying that every compact 1911 isn't reliable. I'm saying that they tend to be less reliable than the actual 1911 design, which is what the 1911 is designed to be. It's designed to be a certain size with a certain spring pressure, firing certain ammunition. That is the way that it is built. And I mean, it's like me saying my car is no good because it doesn't run on diesel, and somebody else is like, you're an idiot if you think that, because the car is not designed to run on diesel. Yeah, you're 100% right. The 1911 is not designed to run with hollow points. It's not designed to run with a shorter slide and a heavier recoil spring to compensate for that. It's just not designed for that system. And as a result, you start to have problems. Now, the Spanish figured out their 9mm system pretty damn well. And this right here is not by any means the only 1911 9mm clone out there. There's a ton of 9mm compact 1911 clones out there. I'd recommend going ahead and checking out something like that if you absolutely want a design like this. Now that we're getting past that, this right here is still a very heavy handgun for concealed carry purposes. It's still got that steel frame to it, which is absolutely obsolete compared to modern handguns. The slide on it does have a locking system inside of it, so it doesn't need that heavy of a slide, but the slide is still made of steel and incredibly heavy compared to some of your more lighter weight alloy frame slides or alloy slides that you'll find on the market nowadays. They make some really lightweight single stack handguns nowadays. Now let's talk about capacity. Capacity is, of course, it's important, but it is less important than speed of reloading. Let me go grab this real quick. All right, this is my Rock Island Armory Model 200 38 Special. This right here is the example that I'm going to use. This would make an alright, half-decent CCW. I would recommend going with something snub-nosed, maybe something with an alloy frame that's a little bit lighter weight than this. But you could still use this, but this is just our example. Now, if you know how to reload revolvers, then you can reload them pretty quickly. While you're dropping out your other shells, you're grabbing your speed loader, you're going to cram those in there, then you're going to close that up and get back to rocking whatever it is that you're trying to do. Revolvers can be reloaded pretty quickly if you have the proper equipment, if they're able to take speed loaders, you know, if X, Y, and Z. But there's a lot of revolvers out there that you can only load one round in at a time, or if you don't have any speed loaders, then this right here, you'd only be able to load in one round at a time. There's just a lot of situations where you wouldn't be able to load a revolver very quickly, especially if they're like one of those old school single actions where you have the ramrod that you're pushing out one shell at a time. Those are better than no gun, but I would recommend having something that you can reload a little bit faster. Now, whenever it comes to revolvers versus semi-automatic, most of the time the semi-automatics are going to have a heavier or a better capacity than your revolvers are, and they're going to be faster for reloading as well. Now, if you have a semi-automatic in 9mm and it's a single stack like my Star BM that I showed you guys, and it holds, I think that one holds like 8 rounds or something like that. It might be 9, but that doesn't matter. And then you have a Glock that holds 15 rounds, I guess. Of course, the Glock holding 15 rounds is going to be more adequate, but if you have somebody who can reload the Star BM faster than the guy with the Glock with the 15 rounds, and the guy with the Star BM can reload very, very quickly, then that guy that can reload the magazines, depending on how many magazines he has, if he only has one magazine for his firearm, then that doesn't really matter much for this topic. But depending on how many magazines that he has, I bet that the guy who can reload and run that Star way better than the guy with the Glock who doesn't really know how to run or reload it, I bet that guy would outperform the Glock guy every single day of the week. Same thing with revolvers. If you're Jerry Michalek, which most of you are not, and if you are, then hi Jerry, how are you doing? What are you doing watching my videos? You're too popular to watch a small guy like me. But if you're some guy like Jerry, then you can go ahead and you can reload this revolver incredibly fast. And I mean, I'm sure there's more people besides Jerry that can reload revolvers incredibly fast, but for the most part, the average shooter is going to be able to reload a semi-automatic much faster than a revolver. Of course, having more rounds or more capacity inside of your magazine is going to be better. It's going to be better than having to reload, but having the skills and capability to reload your firearm quickly is a very important factor as well, and you really see a difference for most people in the speed of reloading a revolver versus reloading a semi-automatic. Semi-automatic, very simple. Your magazine, your rounds are already inside of a magazine, and you just cram that into the gun, cycle the slide, and you're back to going. Unless you have yourself a speed loader or something like that and you're proficient with revolvers, like old Jerry is, which most people are not, let's be honest here. I'm one of them. I'm definitely not nearly as good as Jerry. I'm not a speed loader for revolvers, like, at all. As a matter of fact, I don't even own any actual speed loaders. But if you are good with revolvers and you know what you're doing, then you can reload these pretty quickly. But for most people, a semi-automatic is going to be quicker to reload than something like this. Alright, now we're starting to lean into some areas that are actually half-decent options for concealed carry firearms. This right here is my Smith & Wesson SW40VE. These are incredibly cheap Glock clones, but it will serve our purpose for what it is that we're actually discussing here. This is noticeably lighter than the 1911 with the steel frame on it. This right here is obviously a polymer frame. You can very clearly see that this right here is a plastic frame. It's got a steel slide on it, so it is very top heavy, but besides that, it is like a way noticeably lighter gun than the 1911. It also holds far more ammunition. This holds 14 rounds of 40 Smith & Wesson. There's a 9mm version of this that holds 15 or 16 rounds. I can't quite remember. I don't own one of those. But this right here would make actually a pretty good option for concealed carry. As long as you're, you know, a big dude and you have a jacket and you're not here in Florida or something like that, this definitely not a bad option compared to some of the things that we have looked at. Now, this right here might have the weight category, you know, might have a check mark there in the weight category, but it still is quite a sizable handgun. And because of that size, these would be uncomfortable to carry. And that is our next topic that we're going to be discussing. A lot of people just, you know, they'll tell you, hey, man up, get over it, you know, deal with it. The gun's uncomfortable, but at least you have a gun. I always recommend people get themselves a gun that is comfortable to carry. You are going to be carrying that thing way, way more often than you're going to be using it. And if you do end up using it, fantastic, Kevin, I appreciate that, buddy. If you do end up using your gun, then the police are going to take it for evidence, and there's a very strong likelihood that you're not going to end up getting that back. So I would recommend getting yourself something that is comfortable to carry. Of course, you're going to want to get range time in and things like that. Comfort for shooting is less important than comfort for carry. A lot of times whenever people have these extremely compact guns, it's less comfortable to shoot. There's just more recoil behind it. They can't quite get their support hand pinky on the gun to be able to hold it properly. What are you? Get out of here, you. Go somewhere else. Fucking Florida, dude. I'm surrounded by peacocks and boars and bugs and Jesus Christ, I'm trying to make a video here. What was I just talking about? You're going to be carrying that thing a lot more than you're going to actually be using it, hopefully, unless you're living in like Detroit or something, in which case you're not allowed to carry that anyway. Go turn yourself into the police, you criminal. I already made a video on this. I'm not going to exactly talk about the specs of this thing, but with this being as large as it is, you would need, like I said, a very particular setup of overgarments to go ahead and conceal this thing. Unless you're in an open carry state, then hell, just pop this thing in a holster and have it on your hip. You know, size matters not as much with open carry than it does with concealed carry. But this would be difficult to conceal because just, I mean, printing is a thing and it does exist and people do see it. And you print a lot more with a larger, heavier, well, a larger, more stout firearm than you would with a smaller, more compact firearm. Typically, your double stack firearms are going to be, obviously they're going to have more capacity, but they're going to be a little bit fatter, a little bit wider than a lot of your single stack firearms, unless you're talking a 1911, in which case this is actually smaller than my 1911, but not by a significant margin. And because of that, this is going to be a little bit on the more difficult side to conceal. Now, if you're used to carrying a 1911, this will be a piece of cake, dude. Don't even worry about it. But if you're used to carrying compacts and you're here in Florida and you don't have a bunch of jackets on and whatnot, then this right here might be a little bit of a challenge. Let me go grab something that would actually be a really good option. All right, this is a firearm that I actually carry. This is one that I legitimately keep in my pocket and carry around. I have a pocket holster. I'm just showing up the firearm here. But this is my secondary firearm. This is not my primary. I'm not going to show off my primary. Anyone who knows this channel, they know that I have the things I show off on the channel, and then I have my own personal, it's time to go and take care of business equipment that I keep separate off the channel. Nobody needs to know about that stuff. But this right here is something that I use whenever it's, you know, since I'm in Florida, whenever it's hot outside and I'm rocking like basketball shorts, or whenever I'm on the beach, or whenever I am just going to the freaking convenience store for a six-pack or something like that and some candy bars. This right here will be what I throw in my pockets, and this right here is a very convenient option. It's nice and small, it's compact. This is the Taurus Spectrum 380, chambered obviously in 380. I use these little hollow points whenever I'm out, you know, doing whatever the hell it is that I'm doing. 380 doesn't really travel fast and effectively enough for hollow points to effectively and reliably expand, but it's better than ball ammunition at least. Whenever I carry this thing, I do carry multiple magazines with this thing. I'd be better off carrying a snub nose revolver than I would this thing, just because of the weight and size ratio between the revolver and this thing right here. I'd carry the revolver 6-shot 357 Magnum, much more powerful ammunition, and the size would be roughly the same. The revolver would be a little bit fatter, but the overall size would be the same, and they are both very much capable of being pocket guns. But this right here being a semi-automatic, with multiple magazines that I have, I can reload this thing very, very quickly, and that is why I carry this as opposed to a revolver with more powerful ammunition. That was my mindset behind carrying something like this. But this gun is much more comfortable to carry than some of the other firearms that I've shown, and that is why whenever I am wanting to be comfortable, I will carry something like this. This is not the best firearm. This is not the most reliable firearm. This is not exactly a tank. This is just a self-defense protective pistol. Definitely a good option for anyone who is in the markets for something that they can just throw in a pocket and forget about. That is what I'm trying to say here. Like I said, if you're like me and you're in Florida and freaking sweatpants are too heavy, then you're going to want basketball shorts. You're going to want something light. You're going to want something to handle business, whatever it is that you got to handle, but you can't exactly throw a CCW belt on a pair of basketball shorts without it looking a little bit conspicuous. So bear that in mind. Let's go ahead and summarize this video a little bit here. So let's talk about, like I said, let's just go ahead and summarize it. Whenever you're talking about a firearm, some gun is always better than no gun. Take into consideration how reliable it is, how heavy it is, the capacity, how easy you can reload it. Look at your budget, see what it is that you actually have, like how much you have in terms of funds, And I would not recommend spending all of your money on the concealed firearm. I would recommend spending about half of your available money on the concealed firearm and the other half on ammunition and magazines and holster and ways to transport it and perhaps some range time and training time. There's a lot more that goes into getting a defensive handgun versus just buying the defensive handgun itself. During the 2020 pandemic and all the panic buying and things like that, I had a lot of people, like a lot of friends and whatnot, ask me about what they should get. They told me their budget, or they'll tell me what they actually got. Actually, most people told me what they got. They were like, hey, you're a gun guy, right? Yeah, I'm a gun guy. I run a YouTube channel and all of that. You know, I'm a firearms instructor here in the state of Florida. And they were like, well, I got this gun, or I got that gun, or I got this right here, or that right there. And I'm like, oh, man, that's great. How's it run? Oh, I haven't shot it yet. I mean, I got this box of 50 rounds, and I could stick, like, you know, a couple of rounds through it just to make sure it actually functions. I'm like, yeah, that's absolutely something that you want to do right off the bat. I'm like, all right, well, go ahead and go do that. How many magazines do you got? I typically say if you are rocking any handgun for any actual legitimate purposes, like bare minimum 5 magazines. A lot of people will say like bare minimum 2. I wouldn't trust that, especially considering if somebody comes looking for trouble, there might be more than one person. I mean, if they're incredibly high capacity magazines, like if you have yourself a Glock with those 33 round mags, 2 would probably be adequate, but I would not risk life and limb on 2 magazines being adequate, especially if they are a more normal capacity like 12 to 15 rounds. Especially if you're a new shooter and that's your first handgun, you're gonna end up missing most of your shots unless the guy's right on top of you. You want more ammunition. But I asked these guys and they're like, oh, it came with 1 magazine. And I'm like, yeah, if you have to reload that 1 magazine under pressure in the middle of combat, then it's not going to be the best situation for you. I would recommend getting yourself at least bare basic minimum 1 more magazine so you have the ability to reload. That is like the bare necessities, but I would recommend at least 5 as like the minimum. That's always my recommendation. All right, well, hopefully this helped some people out today. I think that this right here was a pretty fun video to make, but I got somewhere to be and a lot of guns to clean up off my picnic table over there from this video that I was just filming. So I got to go clean up that mess. And I got somewhere that I have to be, so I'm going to go ahead and say, hey folks, thanks for watching, subscribe to the channel, like the video, description down below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go ahead and go check that out, have fun. Alright, I'm going to go handle what I have to handle, you guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day, and of course, thanks for watching. Alright, I want to point out in terms of comfort, something like the Star BM right here, big hammer on the back. A lot of times I would conceal carry this thing, and I'd have it appendix carry, right? And man, having that hammer right there digging into your side is definitely not a fun way to go. If you're gonna appendix carry, I don't recommend having something that has a sharp hammer on it. It's just a bad combination. Okay, I remember this thing. This thing is in no way pleasant to shoot. I stuck a spring from a ballpoint pen into the back of the grip safety right here. Grip safety has been bypassed, but this is still very uncomfortable. The recoil in this is not fun. And the grip safety it's metal and it juts out, and it's just a terrible, terrible design. But the pen spring helps with that recoil absorption at least a little bit. Let's see if we can get this semi-reliable firearm to function like a semi-automatic. Here we go, baby. Oh boy, that was not fun. Oh god, the trigger is awful. Oh, fantastic. Hey, I actually hit the plate. Hey, I hit it again. At least it's semi-accurate. Ah, there's our malfunction right there. How do you like that? Smith & Wesson SW40VE. As far as defensive CCW handguns go, this one is not that bad of an option. Definitely lightweight, definitely comfortable, but still not the best. I mean, it's not uncomfortable. Definitely more comfortable than that Lon L9 that I was shooting earlier. It's still kind of big though. Not exactly my ideal CCW option here in the state of Florida. Classic 1911. I could never get enough 1911 B-roll footage, so let's send some 45 ACP lead downrange. I gotta adjust my grip with this thing because this 1911 gives a pretty gnarly hammer bite. Oh, We had a 1911 malfunction. That never happens. There we go. Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garrett. It's a shame that bolt action shotguns aren't more mainstream.